Tom, I'll let you tell everybody what today is about and introduce our guest.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased today to have Mary Theroux, who is the head of the Independence Institute, here to share us her decades of experience with homelessness in California. The Independent Institute is headquartered in California. It is a nonpartisan academic research organization that undertakes studies into the root causes of current issues of concern and proposes innovative alternative solutions to them. As the first garage think tank, its 150 research fellows are on faculty at universities across the country and produces about 6 to 10 books per year. It is also the publisher of the quarterly The Independent Review, a journal of political academy, and its website, goldmine of informed, fact-based, logical discussion of a variety of topics ranging from the economy, education, energy, and the environment to regulation and taxes and budget. And if you haven't checked out LoveGov, be sure to do that. It is delightful as well as very informative. Among its issues of concern are housing, with studies including how to restore the California dream.
You've gone mute.
Tom, we lost you, I think.
Yeah.
Tom's got sometimes has a bad connection. We'll give him a second to come back.
Yeah, I don't even see him on the screen.
No, he loses connection periodically.
Oh. I just wonder if he knows that.
Oh, he knows.
Mary, what's your website?
Independent.org.
Can you put it in the chat?
I'm sorry,
It is.
very poor internet. Yes, let me try to finish the introduction and then I'll turn it over to Mary. I'm sorry, poor internet connection. The short documentary that will be screened this morning, Beyond Homelessness, Finding Hope, has earned more than 20 laurels from film festivals across the country, including at the San Francisco Short. Mary Theroux is chairman and CEO of the Independence Institute. She is the former chairperson and current leader of the San Francisco and Alameda County Salvation Army Advisory Boards and served as a national advisory board of the Salvation Army from 2003 to 2020. She has co-authored the book Beyond Homelessness, Good Intentions, Bad Outcome, Transformative Solution, and hosts the companion documentary. Please, everyone, go to mute while we're playing this. After it, we will have plenty of time for questions and discussion. So please, 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 everyone, go to mute. Thank you. Mary, I'll turn it over to you. And thank you very much for being here for us today.
Well, thank you, Tom and Rick, for inviting me, and thank you for all of you giving up your Saturday mornings. The film speaks for itself. It's a little over half an hour, and then we'll have lots of time for your comments and discussion. And without further ado, I'll just get it started. Make sure that the sound is on. Okay.
What are you doing with all this money that has been allotted to the city? Where's that going?
There isn't enough drug treatment for everybody in this city.
Leaving people untreated is murder.
Nobody is doing anything transformational, trying to help these people lead an independent life.
You cannot arrest this issue away. You cannot arrest homelessness away.
We have pitted the smallest differences against each other.
People don't just disappear. We need actual, real alternatives.
We're throwing vast resources at this issue, and it just keeps going up. Really? We can't come up with anything better than that? California really was the Golden State when I arrived in the 70s. Everything seemed possible. There was so much optimism. I arrived as a young college dropout, eventually earned an economics degree at Stanford, then ran a pioneering all-delivery market called the San Francisco Grocery Express. These days, my beloved San Francisco has become known as ground zero for our nation's homelessness crisis. But the reality is far worse than it sounds. An exploding population of unsheltered in the street serves as constant reminder that the current approach isn't working. The more I looked into the issue, the less sense it made. Homelessness is decreasing across the country, but in San Francisco, between 2017 and 2019, it increased 31% to just under 10,000. And it continues to rise while city and state spending to, quote, end homelessness continues to grow. Something doesn't add up. In this film, we're going to explore what's driving the homelessness crisis here in California. We're also going to look at alternative approaches that offer hope for a real solution by treating the root causes of homelessness. Even though I work in policy and am used to talking about issues in terms of numbers and percentages, homelessness is different. Every number is an individual with a unique story, a husband, wife, father, mother, son, daughter, friend, or family member, all deserving of human dignity. It's nothing less than a humanitarian crisis, and a solution to the homeless crisis has been eluding us in San Francisco for way too long now.
So each successive mayor comes up with their own, quote, plan.
1,000 units right here in the Tenderloin,
which recognizes that shelter alone won't answer homelessness needs.
My homeless program is one that is sensitive, it's caring, but it's also no nonsense.
We have shelter space, we have drug treatment on demand.
It's about getting out of the shelter business to the extent we can.
Some advocates say things are worse now for the homeless than ever.
San Francisco, like many cities, is in a terrible state. There are tents everywhere. There are people lying in the street that are harming themselves, and they're not getting better. They're not getting the help they need. We don't need to have our fellow citizens dying on the streets. In San Francisco, you can just look at the news. You see people being accosted on the street, stories about teams just to clean up feces, stories about individuals and crime increasing, tourism falling off. It is a crisis, and whether you're concerned about the individuals that are experiencing homelessness, which is the biggest concern, or the businesses or the tourism or anything else, or the quality of life for people living there, it's a problem all the way around, and it's getting worse, not better.
I started by talking with those with experience living on the streets. 3 years ago, Tom Wolf was homeless in the Tenderloin district.
I was just sleeping on a piece of cardboard on the street. I had 2 jackets, double pair of jeans on, stay warm, and a hoodie. I was married, I have 2 kids, a homeowner. I worked for the city and county of San Francisco. I had surgery on my foot. I was prescribed oxycodone. And then I went from there, I tried to get a refill, I couldn't. So I actually looked up on YouTube, and sure enough, I found like 6 people that were selling oxycodone, variants of opioids. And then my addiction grew over time. This has become kind of a regional magnet for homelessness and addiction because of those drug dealers we saw across the street.
So what happens to them?
Well, 700 of them die a year. That's one thing that happens to them. And if it doesn't get them this year, it'll get them the next year.
Here in liberal progressive San Francisco, we have the most anti-homeless laws out of any city in California. And so what that means is that if you're not able to get into a shelter, your mere existence is criminalized. Someone will call and complain, and they'll go out and move people along. But the problem is, people don't just disappear. You know, we need actual, real alternatives. It's not as simple that, like, well, why don't they just stay in a shelter? It doesn't exist.
Disabled firefighter Cooper Arona has chosen to turn her experience to helping those around her as a street medic. Due to her training and refusal to look away from people in need, she's well acquainted with the cycle of trauma that's occurring on the streets.
It was a very busy morning this morning. Some folks needed medical assistance. One person had to be Narcaned. I am a disabled firefighter. When I couldn't work anymore, I didn't know what to do, you know. I went through a divorce and ended up out here on the streets. And in that time frame, I was staying at the 24-hour women's drop-in. And so just seeing the aches and pains and the woes that were happening around me, I started, you know, fixing people that needed it, and they needed it badly. There's a lot of trauma, and there is a lot of things that happen that people never got the right amount of counseling and or support for. And so people out here are lost in a lot of ways. They've continued to lose themselves because they don't have the skills or the wherewithal to know that that's what they're running from.
I mean, is it just that there's so much suffering that the city departments can't do it all? Or?
If you understood what's going on, you see what's happening in front of your own doors. You know, people are suffering, people are hungry, they're without shelter. What are you doing with all this money that has been allotted to the city? Where's that going?
Tonight, we follow the hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent every year to try to fix the problem. It has some people wondering, where's all that money going?
In the 2019-2020 fiscal year, it was estimated that city, state, and federal funding, combined with private sector donations, added up to $1 billion of homelessness spending. It begs the question of how well these funds are being used, especially if it's not visible on the ground. The current model of addressing homelessness that federal, state, and local government has been committed to is called Housing First. The Housing First model prioritizes immediate housing with the intention to follow up with supportive services. The problem is that the supportive services are being shortchanged by the costs and complications of housing, which leaves the underlying issues of homelessness unaddressed. And without the follow-up of support, many end up returning to homelessness. An added complication in San Francisco is that Housing First often consists of single-room occupancy hotels, or during COVID, actual commercial hotels, mixing populations of those trying to establish transformed lives with those with continuing addictions and mental health issues.
If you don't have housing capacity and you don't have supportive services, you can't do Housing First effectively, period. So I think we get caught in this argument about, you know, is it a good philosophy, bad philosophy? It's a great philosophy. We don't have the resources to do it right, so that's why it's failing miserably. And I believe that that's been a large contributor to the huge number and growing number of unsheltered people across the United States.
Housing solves homelessness. It's demonstrably false. And the reason that it's demonstrably false is that when you look at the numbers of unhoused people living on the streets and you understand the significant illnesses and behavioral challenges that they have, it doesn't matter what the approach is, low barrier, Housing First, whatever. What matters is helping people suffering on the street versus how do we get people into housing that we've just created with these federal programs. But because it's so expensive, because it's so costly in terms of time and in terms of regulatory, we're trying to empty the ocean with a paper cup when it comes to a Housing First approach.
When it costs $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 to build an affordable housing unit, we simply can't build enough to house everyone experiencing homelessness. You know, for every one person we get off the street, there may be 2 or 3 others that end up on the streets, and so we keep falling farther behind.
Jennifer, we've been trying to figure out why housing is so expensive in California. Can you enlighten us?
The fact is, growing up in a town like Pittsburgh, California, the 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath home that I grew up in costs the same amount to build in California as it does in Nevada or Arizona. But in California, we've taken a whole bunch of steps to make housing super more expensive through policy. and policy as articulated by law and judicial decisions. So there's almost no development that anyone has a legal right to do in California when it's all said and done. The real question is, does anyone with money or political influence want to stop housing? That is the legal question. And if the answer to that question is yes, then it turns out you don't have the right to build anything. You have the right to hire a lawyer to enforce the law, and after a period of years, you may or may not enforce that right. Some of these are zoning level local policies, long used to discourage low-income housing, minority housing, such as prohibitions on apartments or very high cost fees for development impacts. Others, and those that I focused on a good bit, include our increasingly fussy definition of the environment as what each of us experiences when we look out our bedroom window or jump in the car on the curb and drive to the grocery store. As we've personalized the environment, we've gotten able to use environmental law against changes that we don't like. I don't want to see a different view out my bedroom window. I'm going to now challenge the house that would go in the next door lot.
In 2019, there was a White House Council of Economic Advisors report that came out looking at the problem of homelessness. And in particular, one of the things they looked at was the amount of housing regulations that government imposed and how that affects homelessness. And what they found was that simply by deregulating these housing policies, getting rid of these government restrictions that prevent housing from being built and limit the supply of housing, you could have substantial reductions in homelessness. In fact, they said in San Francisco by as much as 54%.
The effect of adopting the Housing First model as a one-size-fits-all solution for California is that the majority of funding gets usurped by its inflated cost of housing. This leaves very little behind for services like health, temporary shelter, and outreach. And to make matters worse, the top-down dictate by government agencies has effectively made it impossible for programs with recovery approaches to compete for funding.
I have seen the impact that the Department of Housing and Urban Development's over-reliance on the Housing First model has had in terms of diminishing the opportunity of creative solutions outside of the Housing First model.
So a lot of people I've been talking with over the course of the past couple of weeks term homelessness as a housing problem.
Right. Of course, there are housing elements. And if you call something homelessness, and of course you give somebody a home, problem solved, right? Well, I wish we would stop calling this homelessness and really start calling it what it is, which is open air asylum, shooting galleries, and the same. Just think about dementia. You wouldn't leave a dementia patient running around on the street. You wouldn't do it. But we do it with people with these other brain disorders. And if you're a drug addict, this is the thing that people miss about drug addiction. Drug addiction is a progressive disorder that ends in death, particularly opiates and meth, which is what we're dealing with on the streets. So leaving people untreated is murder, in my humble opinion. It's committing them to die. It's where the disease goes. It goes to demise.
For decades, the Tenderloin District in San Francisco has been accepted as the neighborhood where homelessness, drug use, and the sex trade were generally left alone. Unfortunately, it's also home to the largest concentration of children in the city, with poor families crowded into tiny apartments. I've spent a lot of time there over the years as a volunteer. So I was shocked on my recent tour with Tom Wolfe to see just how bad it's gotten, with blocks-long open drug dealing and use, third-world filth, and scores of people in various stages of consciousness. Special public sanitary initiatives have been developed solely to address the extraordinary conditions there. They collect hundreds of thousands of needles yearly, and now have special crews that deal with human feces cleanup.
Is this the worst you've seen it?
There's more feces on the sidewalks than I've ever seen, for sure.
Mayor Mark Farrell announced today there are so many needles and syringes on the streets here that he'll hire 10 people whose sole job will be to pick them up.
I used to literally sleep in this doorway right here. I had a piece of cardboard. I would kind of squat and just sit down with my back up against the wall of this door. Or sometimes that doorway over there. If you come here at night, if you come here at 10 o'clock at night, there's probably 30 people out here just using, right? And the drug dealers will be across the street all the way down. And you know, there's a combination of tension because there's so many drug dealers, they're competing with each other. There's tension because the addiction runs really, really deep with people here on this street, right? On this block, in this neighborhood. When you're struggling with addiction, many times, you know, people have already been through the system, so they're resistant to services because they're also afraid to give up their drugs. So you're stuck in this vicious circle of saying no to outreach and at the same time doing what you need to do to maintain your drug addiction, which is stealing, shoplifting, holding drugs for the dealers like I did, sex work, a variety of different things.
My patients love their drugs so much. I've had people tell me that they had a gun in their mouth, they were so desperate, they were going to kill themselves, but they thought to themselves, oh, I can't leave my drugs. I love them too much. Addiction is a motivational disturbance that it takes over the basic survival system of the brain and says, use drugs above everything else. Don't care about your family, don't care about your job, don't care about your very survival because the drugs are more important.
The lack of supportive services like drug treatment facilities is taking its toll on the sheltered and unsheltered alike. In 2020, 712 people died of overdoses in San Francisco, almost triple the number of deaths from COVID. But 2/3 of them were housed, so clearly housing isn't solving the problem.
There isn't enough drug treatment for everybody in this city. There's only, the Department of Public Health only has access to like 35 detox beds for a population of 800,000 people, of which at least 25,000 are struggling with drug addiction.
It's really hard. We were walking around today. You glance up an alley, there's a young man. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's just passed out. This is the richest city in the country, probably. We're 30 miles from Silicon Valley, where innovation is happening, where new solutions to the 21st century problems are being created. You know, we're working on going to Mars. Behind those tarps are tents that the city calls a safe sleeping site that the city's maintaining. So it's tents with bathroom facilities, with a gigantic sharps container and so on. And it's $61,000 for every tent in there. Okay, so you spend $61,000 to maintain somebody in a tent with their problems. Really? We can't come up with anything better than that?
What we're seeing now is the government and the folks who are working in City Hall really at odds when it comes to this crisis. We are unfortunately governing and legislating on the extremes, where we have pitted the smallest differences against each other.
When you get government funding, there's strings attached. That's just how the game is. So if they stand up and speak out and say, no, this is wrong, it's a very real reality that they could lose their funding.
If we look at the first couple months of 2021, we have already seen 135 deaths by way of overdose here in the city and county of San Francisco. So that number alone proves that there is a real disconnect between homeless individuals, their outcomes, and the policies and programs that are coming out of City Hall here in San Francisco.
Great big headlines in the Chronicle this week about the mayor unveiling the boldest housing project in 25 years or something. She's going to give out 1,100 housing vouchers and then build 1,500 new housing units. So.
Because I haven't read the headline and whatnot, but if like, you're telling me this, my mind goes to automatic doubt. Because if like I had mentioned prior, that if it was that easy, why aren't we have already been doing this? Why are we, now you're making this big grandiose thing? It should already be done. But I don't see it. It takes too long for that to happen. It's like crickets, you know, like crickets. That's all you hear is nothing when it comes. That's what I hear when the city's involved and the city entities are involved in something like this. It's crickets.
So what do we do? Is it hopeless as so many think, or are there solutions? I looked around the country and visited several effective programs, but San Antonio stood out with its community-wide solution that has solved the issue at scale.
It's called Haven for Hope, and while San Antonio has shelters in the city for homeless people to stay in, this place is far from a shelter. Just check it out. It looks more like a college campus. There are places for people to stay and resources to help the homeless, but Haven for Hope goes above and beyond what you'd see at a typical shelter, with a place for kids to play and learn, a kennel for people to keep their pets, a gym, and so much more.
I never paid much attention to the homeless. It was not overpowering in our city. But for whatever reason, it began to increase in those years right before I was the mayor. And by the time I got to be mayor, there was quite a bit of visible homelessness. And so I decided when I made that State of the City address, which was in January, I would not only do the customary thing of bragging about your city and how well you were doing, but I also wanted to show the other side of the city and eventually challenge the businessmen in the room to help me do something about it.
And here's my request to you, the people in this room. Give me the help you gave me when you so magnificently rose to the challenge with the evacuees. If you do so, we shall solve the homeless problem in San Antonio.
I knew nothing about the homeless problem. And as I'm watching this program, what comes to light is that we have all of these problems and nobody is addressing the root cause of what's causing these problems, and nobody is doing anything transformational trying to help these people lead an independent life. And so I talked to the mayor the next day and I told him I saw this program. And I said, we're failing the homeless people here in San Antonio.
He had not supported me in the election, by the way. And there was kind of a rawness in our relationships. Big gruff voice, he said, Mayor, are you really serious about doing something for the homeless? And I said, I'm completely serious about it. And he said, well, I want to help. And I said, you just became the chairman of the committee if you'll accept it. He says, I accept it. And that was the beginning of our little war on the homeless in San Antonio.
Could you see a 24/7 shelter in the city of San Antonio?
Yes. Yes, I could. I think it ought to be a part of the structure of the city.
All the stars were aligned. I had been involved in the community in a meaningful way, both financially, giving of my time. So it was easy to ask people for money where they had been asking me for money. We then talked to the county judge and he said, I'm going to support you. So I had the city and the county supporting. And then we identified all the nonprofits in San Antonio that deal with the homeless one way or the other. No one wanted to relinquish what they were doing to Haven for Hope. And we said, that's not it. This is going to be 1 and 1 is 3. So we had to really convince people, become part of the mission.
It was more than just giving them a bed for the night and a meal and a shower. So the idea, okay, let's try to see how many of these people we can save.
Good morning.
Good morning, how you doing?
Good. I'm Mary.
Mary, I'm Pete. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I'm glad you could join us this morning. We're going to speak to a gentleman, James, and see if we can give him some services. I've already been engaging with him for the last 2 weeks.
How long have you been out here?
Oh, about 10 years maybe.
Yeah.
Told my divorce, and then when she left, took my kids, kind of.
It's a tough battle for James. James is also battling, if you don't mind me sharing, James, all right? With the substance problem, like I told you. And then I ran across him one day panhandling, and we engaged, we talked, and we struck a pretty good rapport. Yeah. So he requested from me if I could help him get into methadone so he could stop using heroin, and he wants treatment as well. So we've had conversation, and he's very determined. He's got his mind straight right now, and he wants to get off the street, and he wants to stop using drugs.
You got things to live for.
The Haven for Hope campus in the center of San Antonio can serve up to 1,700 people at a time and works with 184 partners, 70 of whom offer on-site services. This collaboration creates the kind of support that can meet the individual needs of every person who walks onto campus, whether they just want to escape the streets for a night in their courtyard, or they want the long-term transformational support of full recovery. The impact on the city has been tremendous. Unsheltered downtown homelessness has gone down by 80%, along with substantial savings within emergency medical services, hospital care, and the police department. Since opening in 2010, they've helped almost 6,000 people through their transformational program and into permanent housing.
I remember coming here with only 2 bags, and I remember walking through the gates. Just like now, I was choked up. There's a different vibe here. You walk through those gates and you see something different than you see it what your typical homeless shelter looks like. It was vibrant, it was colorful, it was bustling. There were people smiling back at you. I experienced a lot of hope coming onto the campus. People displayed an eagerness to help without delay, and I had not experienced that before. I knew deep down inside that I would gain the tools and the resources and the support to move forward. I just instinctively knew it was different, and this was it. It was, for me, similar to hitting the lottery.
It's priceless to be touched. It is, you know. Believe it or not, it can wake a person up. Just to pat them on the back. It's hard.
Say that. I knew you would be.
I didn't tell you as much as I knew about it, but I couldn't tell you in front of you.
But that's okay. That's okay. You know, because we all need a second chance, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
We're doing that.
Yes, I see it.
Right.
Justice involvement is over.
Right. Yeah, all my court cases have been dropped.
Good. That's amazing.
That right there, you know, if it was nothing else, this has been good enough for that. That part right there.
You're doing great. You're putting in all the work, so now you're seeing the results, right?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
You've got PD on the front lines, EMS, hospital systems, the mental health systems, behavioral health systems. All of these systems were working in silos and not working collectively together to have that impact. So in San Antonio, we were able to, over time, bring these systems together to all row in the same direction instead of each doing their own thing. And I think many communities across the United States could really benefit from looking at the issue of homelessness through a more systemic lens.
You cannot arrest this issue away. You cannot arrest homelessness away. You cannot arrest addiction away, and you cannot arrest mental illness away. This is why Haven is here, is to address those issues. These officers that we hired work this area already. They know our clients know them. These officers are extremely knowledgeable, extremely compassionate, and understanding of the needs and the issues that our clients go through every single day with respect to mental illness, with respect to addiction issues. And this is why we hire these officers, because they are acutely aware of the issues that our clients face every single day.
But once we started working here and started meeting all the different people, now we go out there and somebody, we can tell when they're having a bad day, whether it's off meds, a manic day. We know to talk to them now, to try to bring them down. We don't just throw handcuffs on them, bring them to jail, throw them in jail. What we have to do is bring them to the hospital. We try to talk to them, get them to calm down. And that's something I've learned. I can tell you, the other officers who work here will tell you the same thing. We learned that by working here with the people.
It's 22 acres, 17 buildings, 300 staff members, 184 partners. But here's what we do. We help individuals find out what happened, say, here are the services we have to help you get to a better place, and that's what we do. And every person we serve is different from each other. Every staff member we have is different from each other. So we're not here to remake anyone, including our staff. We're here to find out what happened. Not what's wrong with them, but what happened to them. And we have every tool imaginable here for them to help, be helped to get to a better place. And it's happened thousands of times. This works.
I think the community has a compassionate side. Maybe everybody has one, I don't know. I know San Antonio has a compassionate side, and it's at every level. You just have to tap into it.
And the key is having the right culture in running that kind of an organization. Culture is so important. And the culture that Haven for Hope has is love. When these people come to campus, it's unconditional love.
You know, there's a saying, wherever you go, there you are. And homelessness is an inside job. And I wasn't addressing the circumstances going on in here. So, you know, I became my greatest challenge. Until I addressed those matters is when I began to establish having a home for myself. One of the most valuable tools I have today is seeking to understand, where did you come from? How did you get here? How can I support you? My question is, how can I serve you? What can I do to help you get from here to there? And that's the spirit on this campus.
My visit to San Antonio really opened my eyes. Haven for Hope's transformational system was meeting the complex needs of the unhoused with a spirit of compassion. It is the product of the whole communities coming together that is functional at every level, and the pride feeds back into the whole community.
It's interesting, it's such a complex issue, so it's nice to see something that seems to be working in San Antonio there.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Molly, appreciate it.
In 2010, when Haven opened, the city of San Antonio's homeless numbers were similar to San Francisco's. Yet while Haven has resulted in San Antonio's homeless population declining, San Francisco's has exploded. Clearly, we need a new approach. The good news is we have people who care. We have really smart innovators, and we also have the financial capacity in the private sector.
When you look at the programs around the country that are invested in not just the provision of housing, but in actually improving people's lives, you see this very, very different view of how to solve homelessness. And I think we need more of that.
In most industries, the way you fund big solutions is you create a strategy and then a plan and then a budget behind that plan, and you go out and you sell that to investors. If you wanted to create a large real estate complex, you would do it that way. In homelessness, for some reason, we want to raise money, and then we want to say, we're going to go create a plan. And without a big comprehensive plan, complete with addresses and buildings and programs that match the target market that has the needs, you're never going to get the private sector support, either with dollars or community support.
In 2018, Gabriel Baldinucci and his organization, the Urban Vision Alliance, began meetings with representatives of sectors across San Francisco to help design a system-wide homelessness solution. A system that attracts the private sector into expanding capacity, fundraising, and program development that works to move people through homelessness into long-term stability. Their first step was to partner with the Salvation Army, who owns several large properties in San Francisco, and to redevelop 6 of their existing sites to launch their Way Out initiative that will include housing with wraparound services, including recovery, workforce development, and other services, much like Haven for Hope.
So we've got our flagship Harbor Life facility, administrative and residence hall here. There's a statistic out of LA as we look at our ARC program and our Harbor Life program that says people who complete a program for 6 months only have a likelihood of 10% chance of continuing to live a life of sobriety. When you wrap them with support, like life skills training, like workforce development for 2 to 3 years, we've seen that same number jump up to 90%. So we are trying to introduce this concept to the city that will allow them to think a little differently, to really have a different approach, because we've understood over the past couple of years that different people need different solutions.
What's it going to take to realize this vision in San Francisco from a political point of view?
I believe it'll take a combination of things. First, I think you're starting to get a lot of support from case studies around the country of approaches that are working. I think that it's going to be us winning over people one by one to understanding the logic and seeing this solution. And it's also going to take progress that we make with the Salvation Army in adding those beds and developing those effective programs that we see in other parts of the country and bringing them to San Francisco. So I don't think it's going to happen overnight, unfortunately, but we're going to continue to trudge forward and try to win people over one by one and win credibility through progress.
San Francisco prides itself on being a leader in progress, but lately it hasn't worked that way. In our visit to San Antonio, we heard about people coming together across political divides to work together in community to successfully address their homelessness crisis. Here in San Francisco, the people we talked with have described a city that desperately needs to collaborate better. While city, county, public, and nonprofit providers are partnering more here recently, we're still a long way from the kind of cooperation that it took for San Antonio to conceive Haven for Hope. Although more funding initiatives are underway, we know from experience that spending alone is not a solution. We need to inspire community-wide collaboration, such as Urban Vision Alliance's coalition of 32 organizations with the Salvation Army to help reverse this human tragedy. The only question is, who will be our Bill Greehey, who can push citywide political will behind a holistic, community-wide approach? Whichever approach we pursue, we need to keep top of mind that homelessness is a human problem, and our solutions need to meet the complex needs of the individual rather than trying to devise a one-size-fits-all solution that fits the needs of our institutions. Ultimately, this problem is an opportunity to affirm the infinite value of each individual and to establish new and healthy ways of working together in community to solve challenges. Learn more about the complexities of homelessness in the U.S. and the inspiring innovation of communities who are meeting its demands at beyondhomeless.org.
Mary, thank you very much for that most inspiring and informative presentation. And if you would like to make any comments right now, and then let's open it up for discussion. Please raise your hand and please stay on mute until you're recognized. Thank you.
I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Okay, Mary Fisher, you're up first.
Hi, yes, Mary, thank you so much for this. A couple of questions. In terms of San Antonio, it looked like they had that 22-acre facility already up and running. So did it exist for another purpose?
No, it had been a warehouse district. So it was purpose-built as the Haven for Hope campus.
Okay, and one more question. When you were asked about the political influence of this, here in Los Angeles, where I am, we have the Inside Safe program, and the services have lagged behind. So the Inside Safe, which is complimented and touted as working, because about 22 people, 100 people are off the streets, they don't stay there. So in a way, it seems like it needs a different mayor in Los Angeles or wherever who thinks like you guys.
Well, this is never going to be solved by any city, any mayor, any Sacramento. The federal government is never going to solve this. They're just not that good at providing social services, and it's kind of silly that we decided that that was the role of government when, it was formed to provide streets and national security and so on. As Haven shows, yes, the government can be part of it, but it really has to be everybody coming together and working out a strategy together. The different nonprofits applying their comparative advantage and doing what they're best at and coordinating. That's really the key. It's this coordination, communication, and working together. I mean, we saw with Project Room Key, we put tons of people into hotel rooms, but the hotels became extremely dysfunctional, horrible places that were wrecked, and lots of people died of overdoses in them. They were not cared for. Haven operated a hotel during COVID, for spacing purposes, but they had caseworkers in there every day taking care of the people. And so you need people who are taking care of people, and as they describe themselves, and it really is. I mean, I've spent a lot of time there, and they do exude compassion and love. And that's something you don't often find unfortunately, with coming out of City Hall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen, you're up, then Stuart.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that video and your report. I am a member of RAC, which is the Western Alliance of Regional Alliance of Councils in Los Angeles. And we had a roundtable, which we had two CD council district council members there, including Tracy Park, who did a pretty good job with Venice. We also had the supervisor, Representative Horvath, and the mayor had a representative there, and LAHSA, the Los Angeles Housing Authority. And it kind of shed a lot of light at the red tape that they're involved with. And one, they have an $850 million budget, and how it's spent, they said, Dr. Kellum said, was 85% is a cost that it's a reimbursable model to providers, which these providers sometimes have to wait over 100 days to get reimbursed, which causes a problem for them to provide service. And 5% of the budget goes to administration. One of the problems we had at RAC to present to them was that, how come you're not tracking? How can we track this? And one of the excuses is that they only have 5% go to the administration fee, and in order to have the infrastructure to track the data, they need to have 15% of the budget. Also, I got the impression at the meeting that they did bring up the silo. You got the impression there are silos that need to be broken down. And there was another excuse or reason, is that they said that each hospital is limited to 16 beds. And I think it's tied to Medicaid, and it's a federal law. And the mayor's representative said every time they go to Washington, D.C., they're trying to get that revoked so that they can build a mental hospital to help drug addicts and the mentally ill. But they were saying their hands are tied. They don't have all these separate facilities where they can put separate 16 beds. It'd be easier to have one central place. So anyway, I just thought I'd say that. Also, my sister lives in San Antonio. She's she's addicted, and she's now homeless. And we contacted Haven for Hope, and if she were to walk in, she'd have to have proof of ID that she's a San Antonio resident, and she'll have a urinalysis. You have to have the documentation that you have no place to live, and then
that's to go into the transformational campus. They also have a low barrier that you don't have to have anything.
Right. And I appreciate, I love this Haven for Hope. I just love it. But there are other things too, where they have to lay on a mat and be able to get up on their own. And they have a 7-day probation. And we're going to really try to encourage my sister, we're at wit's end dealing with her. And I hope that she can get help at Haven for Hope.
Yeah, they do have, so the courtyard, you can just come and go. There aren't any requirements. And the transformational campus, which is where somebody's committing to working on a program, making a program and working on it. Yes, it has a residency of San Antonio requirements, but the young woman I interviewed, the one who said homelessness is an inside job, She gamed the system. You're supposed to be a resident of San Antonio for 9 months, and she came there from Sacramento, but she rigged some stuff on Facebook to make it look like she'd been in San Antonio, and they took her. So it's it's not perfect. Haven for Hope. So to the bureaucracy issue, Haven for Hope is an independent 501c3. So it's extremely transparent. It's not a government operation. It's not bureaucratic. Their annual budget is operating budget is $25 million. Take that in to serve thousands of people a year, $25 million. And California, just spent $24 billion over 5 years to increase homelessness here. So bureaucracy is never, again, I sound like a broken record. The city and state, yes, they need to be partners in these things. Obviously, it needs to be a community-wide, and that is part of the community. But they cannot lead it. They do not have the feedback mechanism to optimize outcomes. That's not how government is structured. And Haven has to issues reports. They're funded half and half private public. And they issue reports all the time on their outcomes. They have independent auditors watching them and issuing reports. And it's not only that their operating costs are really small, but the savings to the community, to the police, how much the fire department spends responding to calls on homelessness and other city agencies and the hospitals you're talking about, where they have somebody for, maybe they can keep them for 72 hours or not. So we have a very broken system, but we could easily have a well-functioning one. We're working with a coalition here in San Francisco and in Oakland, and are making some real progress on creating not a centralized campus like Haven per se, but what we would call a hub and spoke, where you'd have a hub, which is a central spot. Again, it's operated independently. People can come or be brought, get triaged, have short-term non-congregate housing, get stabilized, and then get connected into a program that's out in the community that is serving the need that they have on a longer-term basis. And we're very optimistic about it. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Let's talk to the nice man with his hand up.
Thank you very much.
Let's hear from a compassionate attorney. Stuart, you're up, and then Greg.
Thank you. Mary, thank you very much for the presentation. The film was amazing, and it really highlights some of the failures that we've had here in California, particularly the focus entirely on housing, which to my mind doesn't really address the issue. The issue is people's lives, not where they live. And it's clearly much more complicated than just building some low-cost housing. And I wish we could get that message through to the legislature that they're pushing all of this money into building more low-income housing when that's not the primary issue. The primary issue is people's lives. And I listened to obviously there are a variety of viewpoints presented. One person that I heard from that I have to say I disagree with violently is Jennifer Hernandez, because her attitude is, oh, well, it's all regulation. If we got rid of all the regulation, the problem would disappear. I'm sorry, that's bullshit. Pardon the language. But we have big problems here in California with land costs. I don't know if they have them in parts of Texas. I don't think they're even the case in a lot of California, but in the urban areas of California, the land costs are ridiculously high. And I don't think you can build affordable housing in places like San Francisco and Oakland, at least in a large part of those cities, because the costs are so high. As I said, $700,000 per unit. You can't build affordable housing if you're paying $700,000 per unit without an enormous subsidy. And that subsidy would be far better used to help people deal with their mental and emotional problems, and for that matter, physical problems. And that ought to be the focus rather than building housing for people who aren't going to stay there. So anyways, I do think I'm encouraged by your saying that Oakland and San Francisco are working on developing a more unified and multifaceted approach. I do have to say that I think that the campus approach maybe works better than a spoken hub approach, because the problem is, how do you keep track of all these people who have gone out into the spokes, and maybe don't have as easy access to the supportive services that they really need. I think that the whole idea of wraparound services is central. People have to feel like they can get everything they want. Thank you.
Well, you've said a lot there, so I'll try to hit it. I agree that housing is not the solution. Homelessness is very complex, and people become homeless for a great many reasons. Housing almost has nothing to do with it. However, we do have a housing crisis in California, and housing is an issue. If you do get people stabilized and back on their feet and they're ready to go live independently, there's a dearth of places that people can afford to live. And this has been caused by government destroying cheap housing, destroying entire neighborhoods in the name of urban renewal and other things, and regulation. San Francisco is a very flat city. Most of it is 4 stories, has capped at 4 stories. Oakland has vast numbers of vacant lots. We've done numerous studies on housing, and I have to dispute you. Our studies show that it is regulation. And the fact that so-called affordable housing is costing the government up to $1 million per unit in Los Angeles now is because of all the requirements they have for what has to be in that affordable housing. And it's absurd. You know, after World War II, when my dad came back from the war, he built housing for returning GIs and their families. It cost $500. That's $6,500 currently. I mean, admittedly, it wasn't, top end. It was a 1-bedroom home, but you could buy it and add on to it over time. And back in the 40s, developers also paid for all the infrastructure. They had to pay for the streets and the city and the sewers and the streetlights and so on. Government did not cover those costs. So we have made housing enormously expensive, unnecessarily expensive, and that is a huge problem that we're facing. Let's see, we're talking about something else and I've completely forgotten in all the housing discussion, but I need to be keeping notes. I'm sorry.
Okay, Stuart, you'll have a chance to return after everybody gets their first chance. Let's go to San Mateo County. Greg, you're up, followed by Kelly. Unmute, please, Greg.
There I am. Well, first, I want to thank you, Mary, for your time and attention to this, serious social issue. I could debate you on the housing issue, but what I'd like to focus on instead is one of the factors that seems to be contributing to the problems. I remember there was a video in Seattle by a news station a few years back talking about how Rhode Island had solved the problem by taking people off the street and putting them in, I guess I'll call them abandoned prisons, and providing services there. And there were stories of people who had been serviced for a long period of time and recovered. So I guess my question is, does the San Antonio program and other productive programs prevent drug dealers from getting access to the people who are getting services? And is there some method or compulsion that prevents people from getting out and falling back into the drug using behavior? I'm wondering how they control the drug use, which is it's not the only issue with mental illness, but it seems to be the power of the attraction of drugs is one of the things that drags people back. So I'm wondering how they handle that. Thanks.
So people who recover from drug and alcohol abuse there's a very high recidivism rate. It's generally, if you're only in a short-term program, it's upwards to 90% recidivism. If you're in a long-term supported system like Haven, like the Salvation Army's Harbor Light program and the new Way Out in San Francisco that the Salvation Army is operating, the recidivism rate drops to 10%. So people have to not only, get free of drugs, but they have to learn how to live without relying on that crutch. So you have to learn how to go through life's little bumps that we all face, and especially if you're struggling to establish a new life for yourself, there are a lot of bumps in the road. And so being supported on a longer term basis and being supported through, oh my God, here's a horrible problem, but I don't have to drink to solve it. I don't have to use drugs to solve it, proves to be the way to do it. So the key is longer term support, so that you can learn how to live without that help. Did that answer your question, or did I miss it?
I was focused more on how they keep the people away from the drug dealers or the drug dealers away from the people.
You can't keep people away from, so you can't force somebody to be and stay in recovery. They have to want to. If they want to go find a drug dealer, they're going to go find a drug dealer. They have to want not to go find a drug dealer. And that's one of the problems we have here in California is we don't, the government doesn't fund any sober housing. So if somebody does go through recovery and then they get subsidized housing, and by the way, San Francisco has more permanent supportive housing than any city in the country, but it's all no barrier. So even if you've gone through recovery and you get a subsidized unit, your neighbor is probably a drug addict using, and it's very difficult to stay sober when you're living in a building full of addicts and dysfunctional and crazy people who are having psychotic episodes. I mean, it's enough it would drive me to drugs, I'll tell you. So.
Thank you. Mary, I'll just take my prerogative and ask you one question. One of the approaches that I think has been a key part of the success, places like San Antonio, Houston, etc., has been security, even in emergency and transitional housing. As I think everyone well knows, one of the big objections that people have to shelters is they are more afraid being in the shelters than they are being on the street. And so if you could just comment on that.
Yeah.
Sindagoro, December 13th, 2020.
So
please everyone mute.
As we saw with like Project Room Key, for example, these shelters that the city operates and a lot of nonprofits operate don't provide any security. A lot of the nonprofit permanent supportive housing here in San Francisco, or the shelters that are operated, they'll have one person, minimum wage person on a desk and no services whatsoever. There's a brief scene in the film of Haven for Hope's security room with the tens of cameras. They have cameras on every part of the campus. They have a 110 person security force, which includes moonlighting policemen, such as we've interviewed in it, because it is a very volatile and unstable community, and fights break out and disputes break out. And they are trained in they've never had a violent incident in their 12 years because they do provide security. They provide security to the people who are there. So the people who are there feel safe. A lot of the people there also are sufferers of domestic abuse. So they have to be protected from the people who want to continue to hurt them. So they're in a safe place. And then they also make sure that there's not a spillover effect into the surrounding communities, such as we saw with Project Room Key hotels, where the neighbors were just devastated by people who were not being controlled at all. They're supposed to be staying in their hotel room, but nobody's keeping in their hotel room. And they're going out in the streets and engaging in all kinds of unsocial behavior. And it destroyed the neighborhoods that these hotels were in. I interviewed San Antonio Police Department and I asked them, what's the impact on this neighborhood that since Haven came here? And they said it's a much safer neighborhood now than before Haven came in. And that will be a challenge as we try to establish these things here in the Bay Area or anywhere, is to convince the neighbors that we will be taking care of the people who are in our care, and we will be taking care of making sure that they're not spilling over and degrading the neighborhood where we place these. And that's a challenge. But Haven has a very good track record of doing so. And we'll just demonstrate that we are going to be following those following that operating model. And also, since it is a 501c3, a non-government agency, it's liable. If somebody in our care goes out and does something, we're liable for that. The government isn't. So that's a good, also something else you could say to the neighborhood is, if somebody comes out and pees on your lawn, sue us and we have to pay you for damages, much less if they do anything worse than that. So.
And another message that came through very strongly in the video is the importance of having trained security in recognizing the types of issues that come up, not shoot first, ask questions later.
Yeah, this was
Kelly,
filmed soon after, or when George came out, I just went back to that interview with those policemen because that's what they said by working there, moonlighting at Haven in security, they get to know how to deal with people who are having, who are in crisis or either on drugs or mentally ill or whatever. And as they said, they learn how to talk to them, not throw handcuffs on them and arrest them, but talk to them, talk them down. And then plus Haven then gives them someplace to go. So the police, if they can pick somebody up who's in crisis, drop them off at Haven, know they're going to be taken care of and go right back out on the beat and not spend hours in paperwork of arresting, processing somebody through the criminal justice system. So it's just an enormously beneficial system to the whole community. And I'm sorry to talk over you. Go.
No problem. Kelly, you're up, then David. Thank you.
Okay. So Mary, here in the Bay Area, we don't have lots of open land. So I'm wondering, have you seen programs or can you visualize wraparound programs in other types of buildings? We have vacant office buildings. Can you visualize using our existing architecture to start the kind of program that you showed us in San Antonio?
Well, interestingly, there are several closed colleges now in the Bay Area. Several universities failed during the pandemic. So there are some campuses that actually are vacant and would be very directly applicable to this. Purpose-built facilities are much more economical than retrofitting something that was built for another purpose. So it's a very wise investment to make to build something that's created for the purpose of helping people transform their lives. We spend millions and billions of dollars building stadia, and we fast track them through CEQA and everything else. And we ought to be able to direct resources more. And we're spending, we're wasting billions of dollars now on homelessness problems. Again, this audit that recently came out from the states showing that, the states spent $24 billion over the past 5 years in homelessness and didn't track any outcomes. And we had a huge increase in homelessness. So we are spending lots of money on this issue. If we spent it correctly, it would be enough.
For sure. David, and then Rick. David, you're muted. David, you're muted. Why don't we go to Rick and then we'll come back to David. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I
guess my question is, I live in San Francisco, so it's San Francisco focused, but it could apply elsewhere, I guess. My question is, and I don't have much, real knowledge in the area of homelessness, but you hear about the nonprofit, I'll call it nonprofit industrial complex. And we're throwing so much money through individual nonprofits and they're all providing services of some sort, whether they're carrying toilets out to the camps or whatever, but we're not getting people off the street. And I suspect each of those nonprofits wants to keep their funding, wants to keep their own fiefdom, and that seems like that would be, I'll call it a barrier to cooperating into some sort of a solution, as you in the film sort of described today. Is there any political movement that could take place either on a city basis or a state basis that essentially requires cooperation in order to get state or city funding? Basically put some requirements on these nonprofits that we're giving so much taxpayer money to.
Those are two really excellent points, and I'll address them separately. First of all, most nonprofits are operating under government contracts, so they're doing what they're, unfortunately, when you're in a nonprofit, and I've been involved with the Salvation Army for 25 years in San Francisco, you hear about a government grant and it sounds like easy money, right? But it's that you've got to, then you find out what the terms are. And the terms are, you cannot have any requirements. You can't require people to be working on recovery. You can't require people to be working on job training. You can't require anything. And so you give them a room, and this is a real example. It turns out, they're cutting up stolen electric scooters and charging the batteries in their room, and they start a fire and they cause millions of dollars of damage to your building. And so these nonprofits may have good ideas about what would actually help people, but that's not what the government is giving them money to do. So they get corrupted. And they do what the government pays them to do rather than what they know would actually help people. So you've got to cut that out. And so the Haven model is very interesting because, again, it's a 501c3. The Haven management issues memorandum of understanding with all of the nonprofits that work with it, and they maintain quality control over them. Now, they faced exactly the same problem as Mr. Greehey says in the film. Nobody wanted to work with it. Nobody wanted to give up their turf, but they had the very unique advantage of Mr. Greehey, who's the founder of Valero, was privately a large philanthropist. And then the mayor, who is issuing government, the city funding, had control of those purse strings. So they were able to go to all of the nonprofits. Now, nobody has told me this, but this is the inference I've come up with, is that that's how they were able to overcome that resistance, to say, look, you will work with Haven or you do not have funding. And so, yeah, that's what you have to do, is you have to get control, get sufficient pressure from the people with the money. And interestingly, now these nonprofits who work with Haven are crazy about the model. They love it. It allows each of them to focus on what they're really good at, instead of, doing this sort of having to do everything that the government contracts us. And they told me stories about, like, a donor coming in and talking to one of the agencies and saying, I want to give you some money. I'm very interested in this thing. And the agency saying, oh, no, you don't want to talk to me. I'll take you and introduce you to these people over here. That's what they do. And so they're actually now sharing donors across it, which you would never think, but it's crazy, and they're very well coordinated. So it's a wonderful model all the way around. But your point is exactly.
Gee, I'm kind of getting a feeling that government might not be the solution, but is more of the problem.
They can be part of the solution, but they oughtn't be running it because, again, their feedback mechanism is completely different from the feedback mechanism that you need. I mean, when government does a bad job, they get more money and more employees. Because so it's not a good way to structure it, For a nonprofit to get more money from a private funder, they have to show results, good results. But government can keep going out and saying, well, we have to pass, Proposition 1 and get $7 billion to solve homelessness because it's a bigger problem than it was. And so people pass it. You wouldn't do that if you were doling out charity dollars. You'd say, well, what happened to the $24 billion I gave you over the past 5 years? Well, we didn't produce any results for it. Well, then I'm not going to give you another $7 billion, right?
I think
But
that's
we
the
give it to
message.
government for some reason. We seem to think, keep giving money to the people who are doing it who are making it worse.
I think that's a message that's not very difficult to sell to this group. Mary Eliza, you're up, then Catherine.
Yes, in San Francisco, as you've mentioned, we have the Salvation Army, and they have a number of properties in, it looks like, sort of the same neighborhoods. Is it possible, do we have any idea of how well received they are in those neighborhoods? Are they problematic in the neighborhoods, or do the neighborhoods have any problems with them? Because that would be a really good way to sell more of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. So their Harbor Light, which occupies almost an entire city block at 9th and Harrison, is the recovery campus. And it's very secure. I mean, the area around there is getting gentrified, and it's not a problem. That's one of the properties that we want to redevelop. So the Salvation Army is a large landowner in San Francisco. It owns, I don't know, something like 20 properties. We've identified 6 of them, which are clustered pretty close together south of Market. And we want to redevelop all of those into long-term transformational care for people to go through recovery, workforce development, life skills training, and be able to stay there as long as they need to get stabilized. And I mean, we envision at the end of the time they're there, which may be 2 or 3 years, that they'll be fully employed. But, saving money, and also, as I mentioned before, learning how to deal with the little bumps in life without drugs and alcohol so that they really are ready to go out and live independently. So we've been working on those redevelopment plans for a long time. It's enormously bureaucratic. I mean, I can't, I'm getting very cynical. I'm getting more cynical all the time that, San Francisco, honestly, they may say they want to solve this problem, but all of their actions is they don't, because they will not approve or help fast track plans to produce the facilities that could make a real impact on this problem. They put up barrier after barrier that costs more and more money, and it's very, very frustrating. So every year when the drug overdose figures come out, I've started getting very cynical and tweeted saying, San Francisco's strategy for ending homelessness is death. And it really is. They're doing everything they can to perpetuate it. But again, we're working on it. We're working on a private sector led solution, and we will invite the city to be partners on it. We want the city to be partners on it. But, we need solutions.
Mary, David was having some problem unmuting, so he chatted his question. So I have 2 from him and then 1 from someone else. David's first question, what is the size of the San Antonio homeless population before and after? So you showed the percentage change, but do you have the numbers, the actual numbers, and compare that to what we have and now have in San Francisco? Do Do you have that data?
Yeah, so in 2010, which is the starting point, because that's when Haven opened, San Francisco and San Antonio both had about 5,000 people officially homeless. Now, everybody knows that the point in time count is not accurate, but it's the only data we have. So in 2010, we were the same. In the years since Haven opened, San Francisco's homelessness has gone up by 80%. Just in the last 5 years, Oakland's has gone up by 83%. San Antonio, downtown unsheltered homelessness in San Antonio went down by 80%, and county-wide it went down by 11%. And I have the absolute numbers, but not on me, and but I can pass them along. I'm also going to put my email in the chat, so I'm very happy to engage in ongoing conversation or answer any questions that we don't get to today.
Well, that brings up another question from chat, and that is the availability of the video. And we put the Independent Institute website into chat, but could you comment on the
beyondhomeless.org, and I'm pointing to the documentary is there. It's also on YouTube. So it's and Vimeo. So it's on demand.
Thank you. So this was explicitly designed to get the word out. And thank you very much for that.
We were sort of restricting it for a long time because we were trying to build a community. So we didn't want people just to be sort of consuming it and, whatever, and not doing anything. So for a while, we only had live screenings or virtual screenings that we were putting on, but we've since made it open to anybody, and also anybody's free to show it to any group they want, as long as they don't edit it and make it say something it doesn't say.
Well, thank you, but it's certainly good to have someone with your level of knowledge, expertise, and experience to be able to respond to comments and questions. David had one more question, and then Catherine, I'll finally get you in. Is there an optimal size for such an organization, such as Haven House? And he also comments, LA is a lot bigger than San Antonio.
Right. So I think regional, you can have regional. So what we're looking at in Oakland is, again, a closed university campus and it's early days, but hopefully we're going to be able to get that. And its capacity could be akin to Haven, which again, they have 1,900 people on campus at any given time. I think it's like 600 in the low barrier. I may have this obverse. It's 1,200 in one part, either the low barrier, and then 600 in the transformational or vice versa. And again, the low barrier is just, you can come in and out, except they do have a curfew overnight unless you have a night job, but they do close the campus at night. But it's, showers, it's a place to sleep, it's 3 hot meals a day, and access to services. So optimal size, we would like to have sufficient safe off-street facilities to make sure that nobody needs to be in the streets, and then be able to say, okay, we have all of these options. And, the Haven isn't the only option. You can have, again, a place that you can do anything you want, but you can't sleep in the street, but you can, behave as you wish, but in a safe environment, up to full recovery and training. Such that we say, okay, the streets are closed, and you can tell anybody who's attempting to sleep in the streets, you can go here, you can go here, you can go here. We'll give you a bus ticket to go wherever you want to go, but you cannot stay here in the street. And if you stay here in the street, we're going to arrest you, and you're going to be involved with the criminal justice system, because the street is not a place for a human being to live.
Yes, unfortunately, California, we appear to have some judges in the legislature who have their own ideas on that, but
Well, we passed this
that's what-
proposition saying that, you can't hold anybody on bail. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Catherine, you're up, and anybody else wants to stick their hand up? List is short right now.
That was a great presentation. Thank you. I'm in San Diego. Are you familiar with the effort to start Sunbreak Ranch? And if so, have you looked at that model? Do you know anything about it?
No, thank you. I'll look into it though.
Sunbreak Ranch, it's George Mullen, Bill Walton, who was the basketball player who unfortunately just died last week. But it seemed they're having trouble in San Diego finding a location. And they proposed some land at Miramar Air Force Base. And I don't know whether that's going to work. They were looking at Brownfield, which is down by Otay Mesa near the border, which is now being developed for economic reasons as a real airport. But it seems to me that model is something that maybe San Diego is failing miserably in the homeless realm.
Yeah, it is. I'll look at it. There's another group in San Diego, sorry, called Solutions for Change. And I visited them years ago when I was first starting this work, and they had a pretty significantly large program going. I know they had to shut down a bunch of it because about half of the people who were involved in it were using Section 8 housing vouchers. And the government said, if you're taking Section 8 housing vouchers, you can't have any requirements for people to be in a program. So they had to shut down that part. And it became much smaller, and they wouldn't take direct government funding. So they were having a real challenge. But, they couldn't take direct government funding because they were saying, you have to be in this program and you can't be actively using drugs or alcohol, which makes it that you can't get any government money. So I will look into Sunbreak Ranch, and I appreciate there's either a blog on our website that's a tribute to Russell, calling him a homelessness policy expert. So we were aware of his involvement in the issue, and that was wonderful that he cared.
Thank you.
While we're waiting for other people to put their hand up, I'll ask you a few questions. One of the things that we've covered a little bit is the regional and even the state approach, let alone a national approach. It has been said that California attracts the homeless because of the weather here. And you actually can survive on the street even in the winter, such as we have, compared to, say, New York or Boston. Is this a myth, or is there something behind it?
It's pretty much a myth because, there are there are places with good weather, Texas, Florida, whatever, and they have much smaller things. We do attract the homeless. There's also a myth that the people who are homeless here are from here, and that they're not coming from elsewhere, but they really are. The problem with the data, homelessness data, is it's all self-reported. So if you ask somebody who's on the street, where were you living before you came? Oh, I was here, man, and do you use drugs and alcohol? No, I don't have a drug or alcohol. So it's not really great data. We have enormously generous public assistance. So after 30 days, you can get hundreds of dollars a month from the government. There is an effort now to restrict that to people who are working on a program. But right now it's no strings attached. And we also have a culture that accepts it, frankly. We have gotten to normalize people living in the street, using drugs in the street, having sex in the street, taking care of their personal, business in the street, is now accepted as, well, that's the way it is, and that's normal, and we'll just look the other way because And other places have not yet accepted that as normal.
One of the other interesting issues is different concepts, different approaches, and really different politics based on communities, particularly at the county level. For decades, I'm thinking of one county in the Central Valley, not all that far away, where the standing joke, which was encouraged by the politicos, the sheriff, etc., was that the county welfare office was the Greyhound station. And if you had a problem, go down there and they'd give you a ticket to San Francisco or to Sacramento, etc., just to make you someone else's problem. How do we respond to that as a community, as a state, as a region?
It is a problem, and Haven had that problem too, because once it was up and successful, all these other cities were going, oh, they're taking care of people. They were literally busing people to San Antonio, which is why Haven now asks for, proof of residency for 9 months. But it happens everywhere. There's everywhere there are a lot of services. It does serve as a magnet for people, or anywhere there's a culture like the streets of San Francisco. It's a magnet for people to come here or to be sent here, for them to be our problem. So it is something that you're going to have to, our hope with establishing a couple of models here in San Francisco, and the reason we're working so hard in the Bay Area is because this is ground zero. It is, when there were multiple presidential candidates, they were coming here and filming their campaign commercials because it's such a great backdrop for, this is nutty. I'm going to solve these problems, and whenever the national media wants to do a story on homelessness, they just come to San Francisco and film away. So our hypothesis is if we can demonstrate some success here using this model, and again, the key is that it's the whole community. It's not any one nonprofit. It's not any one city agency. It's got to be the business community, the nonprofit community, the public sector community of the police, fire, EMS, the mental hospitals. Everybody has to come and work in concert together. And that's really the model, is to show this is the community coming together, solving the problem. If we can model that, we think we can be very impactful to other communities, saying, this is how you do it. Hundreds of delegations have gone and visited Haven. Haven gives tours all the time, and they share all of their information freely and openly. They want other places to do it. But bizarrely, all of these delegations go home and nothing happens. And most of it is the political problem of, we're not going to give up our power. So we have to outflank that. And our strategy here in the Bay Area is we're building a private sector coalition, and hopefully we'll get enough political will within that then we go to the city and the state, the county, and say, look, we've got all of these important people involved in this with us. Please join us. And hopefully they will.
Thank you very much. Jenny, your hand's up, unmute and fire away.
Yes, thank you. This is a lovely presentation. And I just, can you hear me okay? My tablet's acting up.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. No, I'm so glad to hear about this. I had heard San Antonio had done some fantastic things. And if you weren't aware, the city of San Jose, our new mayor, Matt Mahan, has just said that he is going to start moving people away that have been camping in the creek beds and the river that goes into downtown, obviously because of pollution issues, but he has a plan where he is going to move people into not, I guess at this point,
tiny
not
homes,
but I forgot what the word was. Did you just say it?
Tiny homes?
Tiny homes, but also he's going to I think do things that are more like of the moment. I think he's moving some money from the affordable housing into this. And I was wondering what if you're following this, to see what your comments are. He's a new mayor to the city just from January. I'm glad that he is looking at the people that have been living along the rivers and trying to do something with them. But I was just interested in your comments, since you all have a successful program and San Jose probably needs some help. So thank you.
Yeah, no, he's, from what I know, and I haven't, gotten really deeply involved in it, but I am familiar with it. They're working with Dignity Moves, which is a private tiny home developer, and they have a wonderful community in San Francisco at 33 Goff. Interestingly, the difference between them and government tiny homes is Dignity Moves can build them at something like $15,000 per unit, and the government spends $100,000 building theirs. Anyway, they put in a tiny home community in San Jose. And Dignity Moves, it's great. They can take a lot that's going to be developed in 2 years, say, and go ahead and put these tiny homes on and use it now to get people into a safe place and get them stabilized and get them connected to services. The mayor there, part of that effort is also the Salvation Army in the area. And I believe they're also working with the people who did, it's called Life Moves in San Mateo, which is another quite a good, it's a tiny home with services community in San Mateo. So there are a lot of kind of small, I mean, not to degrade, small programs, but again, this is a huge problem. So what we're talking about is, it's great to have these programs, and we want to have a lot of them. And those are what we call the spokes, but you want to have something that solves the issue at scale, and you solve it at scale by having things coordinated. But it sounds as if the San Jose mayor is really trying to establish that ecosystem of all the different players being connected and coordinated. And yeah, you sure don't want people who are experiencing homelessness living by a body of water, because the water test shows, not only what you'd expect in terms of human excrement, but the drugs get into it too. So we had an issue here in Oakland, and there was water testing of this kind of a canal type thing that feeds into the San Leandro estuary, which feeds into the San Francisco Bay, and it was just laced with fentanyl and all kinds of things. So you're poisoning your public water spaces. So I'm glad to hear he's closing that down.
And I'll just say that the Rue Ferrari tiny homes complex, RUEFERRARI in South San Jose by 85 and 101. We think it's been very, very successful. It's completely cleaned up the whole area, and one of the rivers, Coyote Creek, is next to it. And we drive by there quite often, and it's tidy, it's clean. There's a lot of no one is out doing things in front of it that they shouldn't be doing. And it looks like it's very successful. So thank you.
That's great. Yeah. And again, all of these things are great. The key is to make sure that they're able to operate as they know succeeds, and not, skew their mission by giving them a grant that tells them you have to do it this way, and then coordinating them with having a coordinated system that connects all of these great programs together, so that everybody's concentrating on serving the segment of the population that they can serve really well. And then this person over here can be serving the population that they serve really well, and so on and so forth, such that you have a really great ecosystem that's meeting the needs of it's not a homogeneous population. It's a very heterogeneous population, and you need a whole lot of different programs to meet its needs.
Thank you so much.
Libby, you're up.
Hi, Mary. I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for the video and your expertise. And I am thinking of so many community leaders that should be watching this. First of all, could you re-put the contact information or the links to the video or whatever in the chat again. I was having technical difficulties and I had to go off and I lost everything. I'd appreciate that. But you know, I probably have a little bit different view on homelessness than perhaps a lot of people on this call. It's very personal to me. My older brother and my younger brother were both homeless. But they were both homeless by basically by choice. They both had a lot of skills, and my brother was an IT tech back, you know, before that was a thing even. And but he chose the drugs over everything, and he ended up, you know, he died in his car on the Panhandle from heroin in 1997. But I was just thinking about, you know, you said that Salvation Army has these properties and everything. What about using there's a lot of not-for-profit builders in the Bay Area that are actually ready and willing to, you know, build actual affordable homes. What about partnering with any of them? There was a wonderful video put out by NBC Bay Area Investigates a few years. Well, it's actually a set of 4 videos. It's called Overpriced, Overwhelmed, Over It. And they're each segment is about 7 to 8 minutes long, but it talks about the whole situation in California, not California, in the Bay Area. And one of the points that they made is that there are many builders that they're ready to build 19,000 affordable units in San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, but they can't get the funding because they're being made to compete with the you know, the wealthy developers who are getting all the legislation written for them for their benefit. I just wondered if you were aware of this or had explored this or.
Yeah, so the Urban Vision Alliance group that I talked about connected the Salvation Army with a bunch of developers, which included, you know, for-profit ones like Gensler, who donated development services. And as you say, there are plenty of developers who are ready, willing, and able to build at cost or, you know, even below cost. The problem isn't the cost of the actual building. The problem is getting permission from City Hall to do it. Literally. We've been working on this for years, and it's one thing after another. Oh, you know, what kind of housing is this? Because it's not really, it's, you know, is it zoned for that? And then it's something else, and then it's something else, and then it's something else. And they pretend that they've passed all this legislation that will fast track programs like this, but
yeah. Have you talked to Scott Wiener?
All of these things, yeah. And Scott Wiener's a friend of the Salvation Army, and
really,
yes, he is.
Like it in his legislation.
He's he's very pro, you know, building and stuff, and so in that
pro building, yes,
yeah,
but only for his wealthy donors.
Anyway, it's just enough to drive. As I said, it's been enough to drive me to just conclude that San Francisco, whatever they say, they don't want to solve this problem. If they wanted to solve the problem, they could clear out their bureaucrats and let people take care of people who needed care. But they like their bureaucracy. They like their power, apparently.
Yep.
And
there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in chat. I'm going to ask a few questions from there.
Yeah, and I'm not following it, so if there's anything.
I am. So
okay,
is closing the streets to homeless sleeping part of what makes the system work? And I think they're discussing San Antonio.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying is our goal is to have sufficient, so there's this, ruling that you can't prohibit people from sleeping in the street unless you have sufficient shelter. And the Supreme Court now is considering the definition of that, whether that means that you have to have enough beds for everybody who's in the street, or you just have to have enough beds for the people who want a bed. Before you can tell other people you can't sleep in the street. So that's going to be interesting. So recovery is hard. Change is hard. Everybody I talked to who's gone through recovery, had some crisis. In fact, that one young woman who I just love, I think she's the best line in the whole movie, which homelessness is an inside job. She also said, desperation is a wonderful gift. And that sounds cruel, but frankly, if you're in addiction, and I'm sorry, I missed the name of the woman who just spoke, and I'm so sorry about your brother. The only thing that's going to make you want to do recovery is if you think you don't have a choice. Like you've hit rock bottom, your back is against the wall, you don't have any other choice, you're going to have to do something. And everybody I've talked to who has recovered had that kind of crisis of something happened and they were just like, that's it. I've got to do something. I've got to get help. We don't let people get there now. We make it very possible for them to stay in addiction until they're dead. We do not provide any incentives. The involvement with the criminal justice system has been the path for a lot of people to recovery. I'm not saying you can arrest your way out of homelessness. You can't, but that's one path. Other paths are, your quality of life is just horrible, and we subsidize living in addiction here, and we make it as comfortable as it needs to be. You and I don't want to live in the street, but we've allowed now that you can have a tent and you can have all kinds of stuff, and if you are not in control of your mental judgment because you are addicted, and you're not thinking clearly or rationally, that's good enough. So we've got to make people, you have to motivate care, and almost nobody's going to recovery in San Francisco or California now, because why?
Good question. Shram, you're up, unmute and keep going.
Hi, Mary. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I've watched your documentary multiple times, and I actually refer people to your documentary as part of my platform. And so one of the things I keep hearing about politicians in San Francisco, as well as nonprofits, is that we have hundreds of beds empty every night. But when I actually try to get someone in one of those shelters, there's no 24-hour hotline that with a transportation that's ADA accessible to transport them 24 hours, 7 days a week. Why is that? Like something that simple, like of a task can go a long way. So is there a reason why we don't have a 24-hour hotline to match people with shelters?
Is there a reason why the state of California spent 25 years building a new IT system to handle its finances and still hasn't, and it's at several $1 billion cost overrun? I'm sorry, but it's a very dysfunctional system. And if you had, especially, Silicon Valley, you'd think it'd be very easy. How about an app? Here where beds are available tonight. And here's an app for getting subsidize somebody to take an Uber. You're going to save thousands and thousands and millions of dollars. But you're right. Everybody I talk to agrees. And I've heard from people who operate facilities, and they say, I have hundreds of beds empty every night. It's hard to describe how dysfunctional the system is. And I don't understand why we then just voted another $7 billion to perpetuate a very dysfunctional system. So, but again, we're working on a coalition. I'm very optimistic about it, and hopefully we'll be able to have a model here soon. And I put my email in the chat. I'd be very delighted to be in direct contact with you and hear more about your platform.
I emailed you already.
We're coming up on 12 noon, which is our usual stop point. We've got 2 people with their hands up. We're going to try to hold to the 12, but certainly the people with their hands up. Another question from chat. Mary, are you working with LA Mayor Karen Bass in any way? Homelessness is her key plan as mayor, though it has not been effective as yet.
We're not working in LA. I know people in LA. I've walked around Skid Row with Dr. Theroux and other people, and the head of the Andy Bales, who used to have used to head up the urban rescue mission there. But we're not active in LA. We're concentrating on the Bay Area. Mayor Bass thinks that expanding Project Room Key is the way to go, and sorry, that's not going to solve it.
Okay. Well, let's hear from Emeryville, former city council person, former mayor Ken. Unmute and you're on.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah, I had this idea that perhaps we created a program like Adopt a Homeless Person, where homeless people could be listed on a website and they could put their qualifications down and potentially get adopted or hired from people in need. There's a lot of lonely people in the city who may want someone to be with them, and it could be a good thing for the homeless.
Unless it's just somebody who's become homeless because of an economic issue, or a family that's become homeless because of an economic issue, I wouldn't suggest that a layperson attempt to solve the problems of somebody experiencing homelessness. Often there's underlying trauma, which then can turn into mental illness and or drug addiction. I'm not saying that everybody who's homeless is suffering from drug addiction or mental illness, but a lot are, and it's not something you want to mess with. They need professional, qualified help by people who are trained to actually give them the tools they need to lead a healthy life. But if it is somebody who just, lost their job or had a series of unfortunate accidents and they just need a room and a chance to get back on their feet, that's great. And, back in the olden days, a great way of upward mobility was to rent out rooms in your house, but nobody can do that anymore. So there's another source of no housing.
Very good. Margot, please unmute.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Margot Smith, and I'm running for State Assembly District 4 in the East Bay. I object to the affordable housing that everybody talks about. Here in the East Bay, it's based on the median household income. So affordable housing is for people who earn less than $100,000 a year. And these standards are, I think, contributing to the homeless issue. So I hope, do you have any ideas how we can change these definitions of so-called affordable so that we can really move forward on some of these housing issues? We have all these laws coming from Sacramento to build affordable housing, but it's absolutely meaningless here in the East Bay. Thank you.
Well, it's meaningless everywhere. So first, the government made housing unaffordable by destroying cheap housing and making things like modular housing illegal. And then they come along and they say, well, we have to subsidize a government program and mandate, inclusionary zoning and affordable housing. Well, we've done studies showing that affordable housing mandates have actually increased the cost of every house built in the Bay Area by more than $100,000. So it's exacerbated the problem. We did a study for Jerry Brown when he was mayor of Oakland that showed that because Oakland did not have an inclusionary zoning, so-called affordable housing ordinance. It was considering it. We did he turned to us. We did a again, a peer-reviewed academic study showing these results. And plus it's resulted in almost no affordable housing being produced. So he chose not to have go along with the passing of that ordinance in Oakland. And then when he was governor, the legislature passed a statewide inclusionary zoning ordinance, and he vetoed it, to his credit, saying, I understand that these measures, which are supposed to help people, actually hurt the very people they're supposed to help. So affordable housing mandates are not. They result in affordable housing units being built that are $800,000 or more. Because of all of the things that they have to have. They have to have a solar panel. They have to have a certain kind of kitchen. They have to have this, that, and the other. So, it's a myth. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Mary, it's now straight up 12 o'clock. Let's give you a last opportunity to summarize and make any recommendations and observations you care to. Then I'll flip it back to Rick so we can finish up any Livable California business.
There are two things I've learned over the past several years working in this. First of all, is that people experiencing homelessness are just like me. Except they had something horrible happen to them, either in childhood or they had an illness that put them on prescription drugs that turned into addiction or something like that. And I just frequently say, there, but for the grace of God go I. I would also be in the streets self-medicating if I had that experience. So I learned a lot of empathy and compassion, and that is why we need solutions. These are people who need help. And the other thing, again, the bottom line is it takes community, and it takes individuals getting involved. It takes, forming organizations to help put pressure on, stop passing bond measures to give the government more money to solve homelessness. They won't. And support, find and support good nonprofits such as was cited in San Jose. And of course, I think the Salvation Army does a good job, but lots of people are doing a good job. And then see if you can help them connect with others, because the only way we're going to solve this is if we do come together across political divides. And I get along with everybody on homelessness because people are, people are of goodwill and they want this problem solved. We can disagree about housing policy. We can disagree about all kinds of policy, but on homelessness, we agree that if we work together on good programs, we can have positive outcomes. And so that's what we're working on. And I thank all of you so much for your interest and wisdom and insights. It's just been a great morning. Thank you.
And I would suggest to everyone, there are hundreds of comments in chat, and a lot, not all the same, that's for sure, but a lot of very interesting things. And so everybody does have the opportunity to download and save that. So you might be doing that if you're interested. Mary, thank you for all that you and Independent Institute have been doing for decades to address this and so many other issues. That fine video and your continuing participation and advocacy in an area where we really need it, and trying to bring people together to solve this incredibly huge common problem. Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank
Rick,
you.
your turn.
So much, Mary. Really, really appreciate it.